Consciousness expansion is the ageless path of spiritual awakening. There are many differing opinions about what consciousness is, but the truth is we can never really know. The capacity of the human mind is simply too limited. Psychologists can't say with certainty how it works, and neither can neuroscientists. Western philosophers like Immanuel Kant would say we can never know, for you need to use consciousness in order to observe consciousness. Western medical models theorize it is generated by the brain, yet cannot prove it. The following subsections break down the dynamic of consciousness through both ancient and modern perspectives. Thought, mind, brain, perception, chemistry, and self-discipline are integral parts of a masterfully intelligent system, all viewed from the lens of consciousness. We see consciousness as a spiritually integrated system and the next frontier for our species to evolve within. We advocate for its exploration under the guidance of qualified teachers. In so doing, we expand both the individual and collective. For when one person consciously elevates, they elevate us all. Section 1. Consciousness. Moment to moment, consciousness is ever present. It is the backdrop from which our reality is experienced. It is the aspect of our lives that allows us to know divine source. We ultimately label consciousness as a sacred spectrum of experience. While under the guidance of authentic teachers, we believe the inner potential of all beings should be explored openly. We believe the experience of extraordinary, mystical, and transcendental conscious states should not be barred. This spiritual exploration has been happening for millennia. It comes in countless forms and brings us closer to sacred insight. We see the obstacles of today's world as disguised opportunities for evolutionary growth. This process of growth is unfolding on both the individual and collective level. We believe that in order to overcome these global obstacles, our species needs to expand consciously and create something new. Psychonaut Terence McKenna, quote, "You are an explorer, and you represent our species. And the greatest good you can do is to bring back a new idea, because our world is endangered by the absence of good ideas. Our world is in crisis because of the absence of consciousness." End quote. Terence McKenna. There are many things one can do to help along the expansion of consciousness. One can experience alternative states through breathwork, heart-opening practices, meditation, chemical and vibrational substance alteration, and physical movement, to name a few examples. We recommend regular spiritual practices like these to aid in the exploration of alternative states of consciousness. We ask practitioners to seek the assistance of experienced teachers as guides along the path of spiritual development. One can explore their consciousness and bring faith along with them. Whatever you believe can amplify your spiritual experiences. It is possible to experience more than just the average state of consciousness, no matter your faith. Cultures all over the world have recorded experiencing alternative states. Many shamans, yogis, and philosophers have described these alternative states in the spectrum of consciousness. Shamanism, quote, in engaging shamanic practice, one moves between what I term an ordinary state of consciousness, OSC, and a shamanic state of consciousness, SSC. These states of consciousness are keys to understanding, for example, how Carlos Castaneda can speak of an ordinary reality and a non-ordinary reality, end quote. The Way of the Shaman XIX. Kundalini, quote, Kundalini induces an altered state of consciousness, ASC. That is, it takes us to realms of inner experience beyond those normally accessible. There are many people, however, who believe that the state of consciousness most people exist in is very limited and fixed. Itself a retarded, degenerate, and unhealthy state which induces fear of change, neurosis, and disease. The real yogi, or Swami, is the master of all realms of consciousness and can move into and out of any state he wants at will, depending on the degree of his skill and mastery. Various cultures have developed ways and means to attain these different realms of consciousness, each varying in its capacity to do so. End quote. Kundalini Tantra 396 to 397. Integral Philosophy of Ken Wilber. Quote, there is a spectrum of depth, a spectrum of consciousness, and evolution unfolds that spectrum. Consciousness unfolds more and more, realizes itself more and more, comes into manifestation more and more, end quote. A Brief History of Everything, 37. Yogic Philosophy of Swami Satchidananda Saraswati. Quote, during the practice of Yoga Nidra, periodic bursts of alpha waves are interspersed between alternating periods of beta and theta predominance. This means that the consciousness is poised on the borderline between wakefulness and sleep for an extended period, fluctuating cyclically between extroversion and introversion. Extroversion leads into wakeful, sensory awareness, and introversion into dreaming sleep. By remaining aware and alert in the alpha predominant state between these two, a profound experience of total relaxation is gained, which is not only far more beneficial than conventional sleep, but is also the doorway to higher states of consciousness, end quote. Yoga Nidra 163 to 164. If one is brave enough to go beyond material experience, beyond the mirage of standard perception, then we are told an infinite spectrum of realities, energies, divine encounters, and conscious experiences await us. Rupert Sheldrake, quote, the case against materialism is that there are features of our conscious experience that are not accounted for by science. Chalmers argues that to take consciousness seriously, it is necessary to go beyond a strict materialist framework, end quote. Morphic Resonance 15 to 16. Daguerre Shamanism, quote, The geography of human consciousness is very expansive, almost without limit. A shaman in my village once told me, "Our minds know better than we are able and willing to admit, and we are witness to many more things than we are willing to accept. The spirit and the mind are one. Their vision is greater, much greater than the vision we experience in the ordinary world." End quote. The Healing Wisdom of Africa 30-31. The hero's journey is an archetypal method of consciousness expansion. It is one of the greatest quests for both ancient and modern spiritual seekers. The hero's journey is a blueprint for consciousness development. It is a legendary quest of self-discovery. When one's soul gets into the upper echelon of this journey or begins initiation, they encounter alternative states of consciousness. Within these states, there are reports of egoic death or dismemberment, mythical experiences of the divine, transcendental healing, personal growth, deep insight, connection with nature, and the finding of individual purpose. Each experience is but a stepping stone upon the path of soul development. The hero's journey, quote, "The journey of the hero is about the courage to seek the depths, the image of creative rebirth, the eternal cycle of change within us, the uncanny discovery that the seeker is the mystery which the seeker seeks to know. The hero journey is a symbol that binds, in the original sense of the word, two distinct ideas: the spiritual quest of the ancients with the modern search for identity, always the one shape-shifting yet marvelously constant story that we find." End quote. Joseph Campbell. Integral Philosophy of Ken Wilber, quote, "The general point is fairly simple. Different stages of consciousness growth present a different view of the world. The world looks different, is different at each stage. As new cognitive capacities unfold and evolve, the cosmos looks at itself with different eyes, and it sees quite different things." End quote. A Brief History of Everything, 52. Shamanism, quote, "Initiation into the shamanic journey is a paradigm of death, having many characteristics of the near-death experience, NDE, itself." End quote. Shamanism as a Spiritual Practice for Daily Life, 171. Yoga, quote, "Once the mind has been stilled and prana flows freely in the nadis and chakras, the doorway to the evolution of consciousness opens, leading the aspirant into higher dimensions of spiritual experience." End quote. Asana Pranayama Mudra Bandha 374. One practice we advocate all spiritual initiates to adopt is breath consciousness. We believe there is a sacred connection between breath and consciousness. With concentration upon the breath, many seekers have encountered mystical states. Breath awareness connects us back to source energy. Hinduism and Buddhism both emphasize the importance of breath in life. Buddhism, quote, "Prak prane samvit paranata." At the very beginning, consciousness transforms into life force breath. End quote. Tattvartha Shintamani. Hinduism, quote, "But it is the consciousness of life which becomes the breath of life and gives life to a body. The breath of life is the consciousness of life, and the consciousness of life is the breath of life." End quote. The Upanishads, 106. We actively expand our consciousness with use of chemical awareness, breathwork, mindfulness, meditation, and general vibrational undertakings. We seek guidance from teachers upon this path to safely experience alternative states and transcendental expansion. We use the sacrament to expand our states of consciousness through sacred chemical rites. Section 2. Mind. Unlike consciousness, which is the ever-present detached observer, the mind is our powerhouse interpreter of reality. Mind actively interacts with reality. It takes in sensory information, processes whatever it receives, and then creates our perception based off past experience. Everyone's experiences are different, therefore everyone's mind is a little different. Mind constantly changes and is an impermanent aspect of conscious experience. It is possible to actively reprogram and change mental habits with practices like meditation, physical exercise, breathwork, talk therapy, and sacramental rites. We hope each practitioner of our faith may seek to understand how their mind works and how to transmute negative mental patterns. We have more control over our mind and its habits than we realize. Take control and find empowerment within. Bible, quote, "And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your minds, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." End quote. Holy Bible, Romans 12:2. The mind is not who we are. It is simply a tool we use to interact with reality. Mind constantly changes and is impermanent. When one identifies with mind, it creates an illusory projection of self. Some call this the ego. This false identification of mind is known to cause neurosis. Buddhists claim this is the ultimate root of all suffering, clinging to an illusion of self-perception that ultimately doesn't exist. Buddhism, quote, "The Buddha holds that we experience the suffering of a samsara because of our ignorance of the three characteristics: impermanence, suffering, and non-self. Of these three, it is the characteristic of non-self that plays the central role in his diagnosis. According to early Buddhism, there is no self, and persons are ultimately not real. This may be put somewhat cryptically as, we are empty persons, persons who are empty of selves," end quote. Buddhism as Philosophy, an Introduction 32. Spiritual Philosophy of Eckhart Tolle, quotes, "So once you recognize the root of unconsciousness as identification with the mind, which of course includes the emotions, you step out of it. You become present. When you are present, you can allow the mind to be as it is without getting entangled in it. The mind in itself is not dysfunctional. It is a wonderful tool. Dysfunction sets in when you seek yourself in it and mistake it for who you are. It becomes the egoic mind and takes over your whole life," end quote. The Power of Now, 40. Native American Philosophy, quote, "Man is like an island, a circle within circles. Man is separated from these outer circles by his mind, his beliefs, and the limitations put on him by a life away from the earth. The circle of man, the island of the self, is the place of logic, the I, the ego, and the physical self. That is the island that man has chosen to live within today, and in so doing he has created a prison for himself. The walls of the island prison are thick, made up of doubts, logic, and lack of belief. His isolation from his greater circles of self is suffocating and prevents him from seeing life clearly and purely. It is a world of ignorance where flesh is the only reality, the only God. End quote. Awakening Spirits. When one becomes aware of the separation between mind and self, they are able to enter the role of an observing conscious witness, a detached watcher of the mind and all of its entertaining shenanigans. We ask our congregation to enter the witness state often and breathe deeply within that mental landscape. Integral philosophy of Ken Wilber, quote, "Consciousness is simply continuing this process and starting to disidentify with the mind itself, which is precisely why it can witness the mind, see the mind, experience the mind. The mind is no longer merely a subject. It is starting to become an object of the observing self, the witness." End quote. A Brief History of Everything, 180. Spiritual Philosophy of Eckhart Tolle, quote, "The beginning of freedom is the realization that you are not the processing entity, the thinker. Knowing this enables you to observe the entity. The moment you start watching the thinker, a higher level of consciousness becomes activated. You then begin to realize that there is a vast realm of intelligence beyond thought. That thought is only a tiny aspect of that intelligence. You also realize that all the things that truly matter, beauty, love, creativity, joy, inner peace, arise from beyond the mind. You begin to awaken." End quote. The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle, 14. Buddhism, quote, "The happiness and bliss of total insight means that one has shed the burden of ego delusion. When one can let go of that, the relief and release is immense." End quote. Being Nobody, Going Nowhere, 120. When thought calms and we enter into this observing role completely, it is called presence, or the flow state. Many have experienced this open-minded witness flow state. It is a naturally occurring state of consciousness, known to be induced by physical exercises such as surfing, sex, dance, running, or yoga. It can also be induced with consciousness-altering substances, meditation, and breath work. Spiritual Philosophy of Eckhart Tolle, quote, "Instead of watching the thinker, you can also create a gap in the mind stream simply by directing the focus of your attention into the now. Just become intensely conscious of the present moment. This is a deeply satisfying thing to do. In this way, you draw consciousness away from mind activity and create a gap of no mind, in which you are highly alert and aware, but not thinking. This is the essence of meditation." End quote. The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle, 17. Buddhism, quote, "The wise one makes straight the trembling, fickle mind. So hard to guard, so hard to control, as the fletcher makes straight the arrow." Dhammapada 9. Mental activity is vibrational. There are various landscapes or states of mind that can be read vibrationally. These brainwave states include alpha, beta, delta, theta, and gamma. Each wave correlates to a consciousness mode of experience. such as deep sleep, deep meditation, dreams, and mystical or transcendental states. The Hindus see the mind as a fluid-like field and thought as vibrations flowing through that field like waves in a pond. Yogic philosophy Swami Satyananda Saraswati, quote, "In Raja Yoga, the term chitta represents the total area of human consciousness, and the waves or patterns of consciousness are known as vrittis. Just as you throw a pebble into a clear lake and it produces dozens of concentric ripples or waves, in the same way, when an experience flashes through the mind, it produces waves. When you look at any object through the eyes, it produces waves in the chitta. When you hear a sound or think about something from the past, that also produces waves. If you go out in the dark and mistake the shadow of a tree for a person, that produces waves. When you go to bed at night and relax totally, that also produces waves. Anxiety, love, and hatred all produce waves. Whatever the mind responds to in the form of an experience makes waves. Cognition in any form makes waves." Quote, Yoga Nidra 64. Native American philosophy, quote, "The lesson of pure mind was shown to me by the clear waters. The pure mind was like the surface of quiet pond, where all things were reflected purely. Once the logical mind sends in thoughts, analysis, definitions, qualifiers, and distractions, the image of a pond's quiet surface is disrupted, and the clear image of nature's reflection is destroyed. I understood then that in order to see the worlds of nature and ultimately spirit, as grandfather did, I had to possess that pure mind." End quote. Awakening Spirits, 97 to 98. The Subtle Body Encyclopedia, quote, "Brain waves can indicate a state of health, consciousness, or activity. Some brain waves are optimum for daily life, others for meditation, and still others for activating a healing state." End quote. The Subtle Body Encyclopedia, 58. Mental health is an important aspect of everyone's spiritual practice. Repetitive, disharmonizing thought can lead to dis-ease in the body. We believe that harmony can be produced by becoming conscious of one's own thoughts and calming the mind's activity. This is exactly how EEG therapy and meditation works. Mind consciousness can serve as a form of self-care and self-healing. We believe that the most powerful healer in your life is you. Shamans can be defined as broken healers, whose first healed patient was within. We ask practitioners to tend to their mental health. Turn the light of consciousness inside and defrag unhealthy mental landscapes. By doing so, one can discover inner health. They can emit harmonic and synchronized vibrations. This inner peace expands spiritual life and positively impacts all those around us. Gnosticism, quote, "The Savior said, 'If you do not keep what is within you in order, your work will remain, but you will not.'" End quote. The Nag Hammadi Scriptures, 303. Yoga, quote, "The spiritual seeker requires tranquility of mind as an essential prelude to spiritual practice." End quote. Asana Pranayama Mudra Bandha, 374. Native American philosophy, quote, "You must learn to see and understand through the pure mind, the spiritual mind. Going into this vision quest or trying to understand the world of nature with the physical mind in tow is to be blind, both in flesh and spirit. You must learn to see things purely, for only then can you fully understand the worlds of nature and spirit. End quote. Awakening Spirits 96. Buddhism, quote, the principal focus of Mahayana teaching is on cultivating a mind wishing to benefit other sentient beings. With an increase in our own sense of peace and happiness, we will naturally be better able to contribute to the peace and happiness of others. Transforming the mind and cultivating a positive, altruistic, and responsible attitude are beneficial right now. Whatever problems and difficulties we may have, we can thereby face them with courage, calmness, and high spirits. Therefore, it is also the very root of happiness for many lives to come. End quote. Shantideva, the Way of the Bodhisattva. Section 3, Thought. Becoming the watcher of self-thought is a powerful technique for consciousness expansion. Many philosophers and mystics experience spiritual awakenings through the practice of thought consciousness. A sort of paradigm shift is reported to occur, where the watcher no longer identifies with or is hung up by the constant chatter taking place in the mind. This state is possible for all to experience. Patanjali, an ancient Hindu philosopher, believes this is the true purpose of yoga. Yoga, quote, this is the teaching of yoga. Yoga is the cessation of the turnings of thought. When thought ceases, the spirit stands in its true identity as observer to the world. Otherwise, the observer identifies with the turnings of thought. End quote. The Yoga Sutra 29. Spiritual philosophy of Eckhart Tolle, quote, the wider the time gap between perception and thought, the more depth there is to you as a human being, which is to say, the more conscious you are. End quote. The Power of Now 80 to 81. Thinking makes waves in the mind, creating a perceptive landscape of our reality. How we think about things is completely subjective. Therefore, everyone's thinking is different. What we choose to focus on and think about impacts how we experience reality. Changing how we think about things literally changes our lived experience of the world. Philosophers old and new profess this belief. Buddhism, quote, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. End quote. Buddha. Metaphysics of David Bohm, quote, the way we talk about things and the way we think about things affects how we see them. This is the point I want to make. Thought is affecting what you see. End quote. Thought is a System 110. Stoic philosophy, quote, the happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts. End quote. Marcus Aurelius. The more we fill our experience with thought and analysis, the less we actually experience. The more caught up we are in the mind, the less open we are with the spirit. Excessive thinking can lead to anxiety, depression, stress, and physical illness. Choosing to think about the past or the future takes us away from the present moment, which is the only reality one can truly experience. Spiritual philosophy of Eckhart Tolle, quote, you will observe that the future is usually imagined as either better or worse than the present. If the imagined future is better, it gives you hope or pleasurable anticipation. If it is worse, it creates anxiety. Both are illusory. End quote. The Power of Now 45. Buddhism, quote, the body is like the Bodhi tree. The mind is like a clear mirror. At all times we must strive to polish it and must not let the dust collect, end quote, the Platform Sutra. Meditation is a traditional practice for initiating spiritual awakenings. It comes in many forms, but all forms interact with the thinking mind. Either through the inner recitation of prayer, for example, the recitation of a verbal mantra affirmation, or the focused attention upon physical exercise and breath. There are limitless ways one can meditate. We recommend some type of daily meditation for all those that wish to experience a spiritual awakening. May it be in any form that fits with your spiritual tradition. Consider exploring various types of meditation and see how the experiences change. This is a great way to safely explore consciousness while creating a healthy and whole mental landscape. All the better to know Source with and to compassionately serve others. Bible, quote, "May my meditation be pleasing to him, for I rejoice in the Lord," end quote. Holy Bible, Psalm 104:34. Section 4, Perception. Sight and perception are closely related. The eyes and the brain are both part of the central nervous system. The eyes bring new information to the brain, and the mind interprets and tells the body to respond accordingly. Eyes see tiger, mind perceives danger, biochemicals released, body runs away. This interaction between the mind, biochemistry, and eyes is what we call perception. It is unique to the individual and can change. Perception is how we view reality, and consciousness is the impartial witness behind it all. As awareness of our perception expands, we can alter and or expand our consciousness. It is possible for there to exist multiple views of reality over the same experience. The interpreter in your head is different for everyone. How your mind perceives the world is unique. The ancient psychology of many great traditions tells us exactly this. Eastern philosophy, quote, "After all, two people can be in the very same room, and one person will hear one thing, and the second person something else. If a third person were present, he or she might hear nothing at all. Our sensory perceptions are impacting our thinking patterns and our feelings and emotions," end quote. Karma, what it is, what it isn't, why it matters, 31. Daguerre Shamanism, quote, "We perceive the world based on our expectations, which are heavily determined by our context. What you see will be based on an internal programming that expects things of the world to present themselves in ways that you expect, so as not to disrupt your entire belief system," end quote. The Healing Wisdom of Africa, 64. Sight is ultimately a vibrational experience of consciousness. We take in vibrational input and transform it into perceived reality. We never actually know if what we're seeing is how it is, or just how we are filtering things into perception. This opens us all up to the possibility that we may have it completely wrong. We may be leaving vital things out. Sacred teachings and modern understanding tell us that we see what we expect to see. Ultimately, the perceived concreteness of our individual reality is an illusion. And the truth is, there's so much more we can experience. Spiritual philosophy of Paul Levy, quote, "The universe mirrors back to us our point of view in such a way as to confirm our perspective in a self-validating feedback loop," end quote. Dispelling Wetiko, 76. Daguerre Shamanism, quote, "My visual horizon had grown disproportionately. I was discovering that the eye was a machine that, even at its best, can still be improved, and that there is more to sight than just physical seeing. I I began to understand that human sight creates its own obstacles and stopped seeing where the general consensus says it should, end quote. Of Water in the Spirit, 225. Philosophy of Timothy Leary, quote, all of us, adults and students, have been censored so much. The filters have been applied for so long. The neurophysiological processes are so firmly set that if we want to expand our consciousness, we are probably going to have to use chemical means, end quote. Politics of Ecstasy, 252. Conscious reality is open-ended, yet the mind chooses to filter our perception. We believe in the potential for all to let these perceptual filters go. We believe in the potential of open-mindedness. Section 5, Chemistry. Some ultimately see consciousness as a chemical experience, claiming that by altering our chemical input, we can modify our consciousness. Neurotransmitters such as serotonin, DMT, and oxytocin are chemicals found emitted by the brain. They are claimed to affect our thought, mood, and emotions. These chemicals can elicit physical responses and influence our behavior. Neurotransmitters have also been discovered in large quantities in the stomach and intestines as well. Many spiritual traditions recommend ascetic diet practices in one form or another, such as fasting, restricting meat, sattvic or kosher eating. Changing eating habits changes our internal chemistry. This can influence physical and mental health. Becoming aware of our internal chemistry is another powerful tool of consciousness expansion. Metaphysics of David Bohm, quote, every thought involves some chemical change in the chemistry of the system, quote, Thought as a System, 54. Philosophy of Timothy Leary, quote, consciousness is a chemical process. Learning, sensing, remembering, forgetting are alterations in a biochemical book. Life is chemical, matter is chemical, end quote. Turn on, tune in, drop out, page 66. Using chemical pharmaceuticals like SSRIs to treat mood disorders is an example of manipulating the chemical process of consciousness. Manipulation of consciousness via chemicals happens constantly, such as the changes in behavior, thought, and emotion when someone drinks too much caffeine, or changes in the behavior of a child that eats large quantities of sugar. What happens, for example, when one ingests small daily doses of psilocybin? We can work with chemicals in our bodies like variables in an equation. What balances us and leaves us stronger? What weakens us and disturbs inner peace? We use the sacrament as a powerful means of consciousness alteration and expansion, itself a timeless practice that predates SSRIs by several thousands of years. Native American, quote, but recent advances in neurochemistry show that the human brain carries its own consciousness-altering drugs, including hallucinogens such as dimethyltryptamine. In terms of natural selection, it seems unlikely that they would be present unless their capacity to alter the state of consciousness could confer some advantage for our survival. It would appear that nature itself has made a decision that an altered state of consciousness is sometimes superior to an alternative state. End quote. The Way of the Shaman, XX to XXI. We seek to ingest chemical compounds which nourish our divine vessel. We do so with hyper-awareness of all that we put inside us, knowing that each choice can either bring us closer to the divine or further away. We seek to better understand this connection. We do so by inputting pure and consciously expansive chemistry into our system while detoxing that which is impure. Section 6. Self-discipline, concentration. Mental concentration practices are found in many spiritual and mystical congregations, such as practicing the Rosary in Catholicism. One recites prayers over and over in their mind as they move fingers along a beaded necklace. Kundalini Yoga students are asked to learn multiple practices and combine them all together in one meditative routine. For example, they may use certain hand positions while imagining a color, chanting a mantra, and practicing pranayama breathing. Sufi whirling dervishes rhythmically spin in a consistent circular motion. Qigong combines breath with flowing body movement and focused weight distribution. All these practices require a patient internalization of consciousness and focused concentration. Taoism, quote, "He who knows other men is prudent. He who knows himself is wise. He who rules other men is potent. He who rules himself is strong," end quote. Tao Te Ching 40. Buddhism, quote, "Foolish, unwise folk indulge in unawareness. The wise one guards awareness as the finest treasure," end quote. The Dhammapada 8. Stoic philosophy, quote, "Man conquers the world by conquering himself," end quote. Zeno of Citium. Self-discipline is the key to success in all things. When we exercise our discipline and self-control, it grows our willpower, one of Source's greatest gifts to us. This process requires stoic focus of consciousness. If practitioners wish to grow spiritually and reach new inner potentials, they should employ self-discipline, a practice which builds inner strength. Yoga, martial arts, musical study, daily exercise, spiritual reading, daily prayer, meditation, healthy diet, and healthy home life all require the focused concentration of willpower. The more self-discipline someone has, the more successful their life becomes. Buddhism, quote, "For self is the lord of the self. Self is the refuge of the self. So control yourself as a merchant controls a fine horse," end quote. Dhammapada 74. Buddhism, quote, "Meditation is a slow but sure remedy. To practice it, one needs determination, which is a solid character quality. A wobbly, jelly-like mind can't have much determination. A strong, resolute mind can have a lot. Every time we sit down, we have to be determined to stay there, not wiggle around, and keep the mind in its place, to really attend to what we are doing," end quote. Being nobody, going nowhere. Stoic philosophy, quote, "He is most powerful who has power over himself," end quote. Seneca. We expand our inner and outer sight by conscious chemical use of the sacrament. Spiritual exercise, deepening our breath and purifying our physical vessel. In states of expanded awareness, we contemplate harmonic unity with all beings. We believe it is time to allow free and open exploration of our consciousness again, under the guidance of qualified teachers. This conscious exploration never really stopped, it just went underground. May we again bring it safely back to the surface, to the forefront of human perception, out of the darkness and into the light. Like primeval man, we should reconnect with ancient technologies of consciousness expansion. They remain powerful and effective. We believe that by expanding consciousness, our divine vessel connects back to its spiritual roots. Together, we can overcome global obstacles and build a community of empowered, joyful beings.